You're listening to Feathers, a podcast of stories of women walking in faith. I hope these stories inspire you and encourage you to take flight in your own faith. I'm your host, Amy Bennett, and this is Season 10, Episode 5. Feathers is an outreach of Abiding Ministries. Find more encouragement at abidingministries.net. Well, hey friend, and welcome to Feathers this week. I'm so glad to have you here, and I cannot believe it, but we are in the back half of the 8 episodes that we are releasing this fall. We will have another 8 episodes, Lord willing, to finish out Season 10 of Feathers. So this week, I am so excited to have Niki Hardy. She is an author and blogger, has recently released a book called Breathe Again, and we're going to be talking about that today. But Niki and I have known each other just in some local circles in the Charlotte area. She is one of the most delightful people that you will meet, and it's amazing because she's been through some hard stuff. She moved from England to plant a church in the Charlotte area with her husband. So she's a pastor's wife, but then in the midst of that has also suffered the loss to cancer of her mother and her sister, and then herself was diagnosed just weeks later. And so she's come out of that with some hard-earned wisdom about how we not just survive life, but we thrive through it.
She says life doesn't have to be pain-free to
Well,
be
hey,
full,
Niki, and welcome to
and
Feathers today.
It's just something I think we can all learn from.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
None of us have a pain-free life.
Oh my goodness, Niki. So you and I know each other in real life. I was trying to figure out how many years we've known each other. It has to at least been 3 or 4.
It does. It really does. Yeah.
I guess it was She Speaks, Lisa Turker's speaking conference, really, I guess, where we connected because we're both Charlotte locals.
That's right. So it must be 3 years ago?
Yeah, something like that. So I have had the podcast since we met, and I have wanted you on the podcast ever since we met, but I knew you had a book in you, and it was probably coming out, and I'm just really excited to share your book and your story, which is all wrapped together. So first of all, congratulations on finally getting the book out.
Thank you. It feels like it's been like birthing a woolly mammoth, but it's out.
You did it. It's here. Well, yeah, so I know you, but let's introduce you to the people listening. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and what keeps you busy.
Yeah, so as probably people can already hear, I'm not from the deep south. I am from the south, but the south of England. And we moved over here. My husband, Al, and I moved over here to Charlotte, North Carolina, 13 years ago, and we planted City Church Charlotte. My husband is the pastor there, and we have 3 kids who we now have 2 off in college, which is hard to believe. James, who's 21, Sophie, who's about to turn 20, and Emma, who is almost 17. So yes, they keep me busy, but so does being a pastor's wife and writing and speaking and encouraging people. That's what I just love to do most of all.
Oh my goodness, Niki. Now I know why we get along so well. We have, first of all, we both have an Emma, and my Emma is going to be 17 this November. So,
wow,
okay.
They are Emma twins.
Yes. Okay. So I have to confess, I got Emma's name from the show Friends. But yours is a little bit older. So I guess you didn't get from Friends, right?
Well, no, we did not get her name from Friends, but she's only a couple of months older. She turns 17 next week. So she's only a couple of months older than your Emma. Okay.
Well, so she was supposed to be a Hannah Grace. And then, of course, Friends was on at the time. I was pregnant when it would have been 2002. And of course they chose the name Emma. And I was like, oh, Emma Grace, that sounds really good. And I guess like a million other people, for whatever reason in that time frame, picked Emma because there's always so many Emmas.
Oh, that's funny. Well, funnily enough, Sophie is Sophie Hannah. So there we go.
Really? Oh my goodness. We like all the same names. That's great. Okay. So what is it like having 2 in college? What do I need to be prepared for?
Well, by the time they go off to college, gosh, my words aren't coming out right today. I think we found that everyone was ready for them to go. It was both wonderful and hard all at the same time. They were ready to take flight. We were ready for them to take flight. but at the same time, it was an end of an era or a changing. And that was hard as well, and sad and good and all the things. So, yeah, that's what you've got to look forward to.
I think that's so true, though, that I have found as, of course, my kids are, 13, 14, and 16, and it's getting ready to be birthday season. So they're all getting ready to go up in age. But I have found that as the seasons comes, they are ready when the time comes, like the whole driving thing. Like, it is scary, but at the same time, they're like, yeah, she's probably mature enough to drive now, which I, like 5 years ago before then, I was like, am I driving? No. It's hard to believe it, but when it's time, it seems like, it's time.
Exactly. And although, by the time my kids were driving, I was ready for them to drive because I had felt like a bit of a chauffeur for the last 16 years.
Amen.
But I also missed just having them in the car and hearing all the chit chat. That was hard. But at the same time, not having to go to every single swim meet, or swim practice or dance class or whatever it was a huge joy as well.
I totally agree with that because I do, even though it's good, and she was ready, I do so miss, the times they're locked in your car. There's something about car rides where they want to open up. They talk to each other, and it's just, I do miss those moments.
Yes.
So the other thing that I just have to touch on is, so you guys, your family planted a church. So I actually just announced this weekend that our family is joining a church plant that is being birthed out of our current church. So I'm going to need all the tips.
Oh, that's fantastic. As a church planter, having people that are for you and willing to go with you and all those things. Now, our move was international, so we had a couple of people that came over for a year or two, but just having people to walk alongside you and get stuck in. So my advice is get stuck in, and it won't be easy. It'll be messy. And, people are people. But it's such fun. It is such fun as well.
Okay. Well, that's a new thing for us. And I'm on the front end, so I'm super excited, but I'm not naive enough to think that it's, going to be totally easy going. Like you said, people are people. But, it's going to be worth it. It's going to be worth it. It's exciting. Well, Niki, I want to finally share some of your story today because it's just incredible, and the fact that you are so joyful when I'm around you. You always have a smile. You love people, and it's hard to believe given all that you've been through. And I would love for you to step back a bit and talk about the story that you actually share in your new book, Breathe Again.
Gosh, quite a while ago now, probably about 14 years ago, I lost my mum to cancer. She was living in Vancouver, Canada, while I was in England. And she got small cell aggressive lung cancer. And if you know anything about cancer, that's pretty brutal. And unfortunately, she died about 14 months later. And then about 6 years later, 7 years later, my sister Jo, who was just 43, got the same thing, small cell aggressive lung cancer. And Jo died New Year's Eve 2011 almost as the clock struck midnight into 2012. And then just 6 weeks later, I was diagnosed, and mine wasn't lung cancer like theirs. Mine, as you know, Amy, was rectal cancer. And given it was so hot on the heels of losing Jo and with Mom, it felt like the family heat-seeking missile of death had locked in on me, or more specifically, locked in on my rear end. And so despite being a Brit with a stiff and perfectly bleached upper lip and all that, I was determined to survive, but eventually found that's all I was doing. And so really my book, Breathe Again, is born out of how we can move from merely surviving a life we didn't sign up to thriving, right in the middle of whatever we're dealing with at the present time, not putting it off and waiting. Because I think so often when life falls apart, we think, well, if I can just get through this, then everything will be okay. Then I'll be able to do this. Even if it's just parenting toddlers, once they're all potty trained, then life will be okay. Or when we're helping with aging parents, if we can just get them into a nursing facility or something, we put off finding God's abundant life until we're through the storms that unfortunately he also said we'd have. But I just don't think that's what he meant. And so it's like, how can we find more of God, more of the life he has for us when life has handed us less?
Yes, and I think it's just so true, though. We always just think life is going to get a little bit easier and you're just going to get through this and everything will be fine. And it just doesn't work that way. It's just one thing after another. But yet, like you say, in that, we can thrive. So you learned this particularly through your journey with cancer. And so I just want to go back to the time when it's in the beginning and you've lost your mom and you've lost your sister and just on the heels of that, dealing with that grief and then finding out your own diagnosis. I just imagine, like a lot of us, when we go through these storms, there's a lot of feelings, anger, possibly fear, that you talk about. The one thing that it keeps coming back as I think about your story is how did you approach trusting God? And I just imagine that there could be so much anger. Like, why? How could you let my my mom and my sister suffer? How could you, let them die? And how could you do that to me? Was there a lot of anger for you in that time?
For sure. And I wish I could say that, being a pastor's wife makes you completely immune to all that kind of stuff. But that's just not true. Yes, completely. And it was really odd that on the one hand, I trusted him completely. And on the other hand, I didn't trust him and I was angry. There was like, are you kidding me? After all we've done for you, we've moved our family. We're away from our family and friends in England. And now this, are you kidding me? This doesn't look good. I thought you came to give us abundant life. This doesn't look anything but abundant, So there was a lot of questioning and feeling like I must have done something to make God mad, or maybe he was trying to teach me something and I just needed to figure out what on earth that was. Maybe I was just too stupid to figure it out, all these kind of things. And I've discovered the more and more I speak to people, the more reading I do. And I've looked into the work of psychologists like Martin Seligman. These are just common beliefs about ourselves and about God. And in the book, I talk about them and help us really practically move through them, because this rubbish we believe about ourselves and God really holds us back, keeps us from thriving, keeps us from experiencing all that God has for us, and keeps us in this really negative place.
Yes. And so that's one thing that I really love about your book is how practical you get. And I bring up this anger, at God, or is God mad at me? And it really is a question of trust, right? And you have these really practical tools. And I would love if you would just share how you can kind of get back to that firm foundation of trust, just real practically. You talk about how you use it every day. And I think we all, we keep forgetting, no matter how many times, no matter what we go through every day, we have to remind ourselves why and how we can trust God.
Yes. I'd like to think that, once you've been through something and you're like, gosh, God is so trustworthy, that you'd be set for life. And it's like somebody's flicked your trust switch on and it's on. And so whatever happens, you're going to be steadfastly trusting him. But I feel like every time it's almost like I'm back to square one, or maybe not one, but 1.5. So I made myself this 5-step plan to trust God when I didn't really feel like it. And I lay it out in the book, and it's this super easy 5-step plan, and it involves checking God's credentials. I don't know about you, Amy, but I wouldn't employ a plumber without checking his credentials. Will he show up on time? Can he actually do the job? So, and I don't think it's blasphemous or God would be angry if we check out his credentials. Will he do what he said he's going to do? And when we check the Bible and we check stories of the way he's come through, or we read memoirs of some amazingly faith-filled and people who have trusted God in amazing circumstances, the evidence builds up that yes, he is trustworthy. And then I think, well, I can't trust him on my own. I'm just not strong enough to hang on to him on my own. So, but he has given us his Spirit to strengthen us and to give us all that we need to do that. So we can ask for his help. So the second part is to ask for his help and just say, Lord, help me trust. I trust. Help my lack of trust. And then we need to choose to hold on to him. And what I really need to emphasize to myself, but to everyone, is that it's a choice. It really is a choice. And the next point is to let go. And I seem kind of holding on and letting go as this one seamless, hopefully, movement where we let go of all that we're currently trusting that isn't God, often our own abilities or our doctors or society, whatever society is telling us. And I'm not saying it's not good to trust your doctors, but if we're only trusting them and not trusting God's plan, then something's wrong. So can we let go of what we're holding on to and choose to hold on to him? And then finally, I always think it's good to keep a record, write down when he's showed up, when he's come through, all the tiny things as well as the big things, because then the next time we're trying to trust him, we have this bank of information and times that he's come through that we can add to the Bible stories and the memoirs and the conversations we've had with friends and that kind of stuff. So this 5-step plan was great when I was in the middle of cancer and dealing with really big life-changing things. But Amy, it's great when my kids aren't back from curfew and I have to trust God that they're okay. Or when I, buckle them up and say, okay, off you go. You can drive to the shops on your own for the first time. Or whatever it is, that's these small acts of trust. It really helps then as well. And one of the reasons that Breathe Again is so deeply practical is because I knew what I needed to do when I was sick and wanted to find more of God and what he had for me. I just didn't know how to go about finding it and grabbing hold of it. So, the book is super practical with questions and prayers and things to lead you through.
It's so good. And I just love those steps because it's just so much in the moment. Your brain just fires off. Like, I can't trust. Things are going haywire. And I, like you said, have a plan. And tell me the phrase that you use.
Plan to trust, then trust the plan.
Yes. So good. So good. And, I think the hardest thing about that is, it's just realizing that the God we have does allow these storms. And yet his the best fruit in our lives will come from those difficult times. And I think that's the thing that, culture would say, when your life is easy going, that's the best for you. But really in God's kingdom, it is often the pain and the suffering where the best comes out of that. And I think that's the thing we kind of have to shift our mind when we think about God's credentials. Often the best stories involve pain.
Yes. And I think, unfortunately, I really do think the world has sold us a fast one on what abundant life really looks like and what a full life looks like. We think it looks like a Facebook fabulous, happy, skippy, healthy, wealthy, everything's hunky-dory kind of life where, our children are well behaved and they skip through the garden and read books in tree houses and, and everyone's great. But life just isn't like that. And I think when we think that that is what abundant life should look like. That is what we're constantly waiting for. We just miss out on what God really has for us. And it's a life of intimacy and connection and joy and vulnerability and friendship and laughter and healing and transformation and Him and joy. And it doesn't necessarily look perfect, but we see a glossy world, so we think life should be glossy.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's just a mind shift that we constantly have to remind ourselves of. Because, I mean, all the time. Yeah. I'm like, this is hard. This is hard. Why am I going through this? And like, oh, yes, wait. God has something good for me here. And I think that's one of the things that you also talk about is just that God knows the plans and they're good plans. And even in this is where I'm going to find the abundant life, which is what you were just saying. Yeah.
And I think so often, even in Christian circles and in the church, we do talk about how, good things come out of hard things, but there are also good things in hard things, not just waiting for us when we're done with them. And I think when we talk about, oh, God will use this, which is true, He will, but it's only half the picture. And I think we do ourselves and each other a huge disservice and cheat each other out of what He has for us, no matter what, in the here and now. And we can look for it and grab hold of it.
Amen. So we've talked a little bit, around some anger that we've dealt with, trust, but let's talk more zeroed in on the fear. I mean, so many different areas of fear that you must have felt, even beyond, obviously, will this take me like it did my mom and my sister? How do you live an abundant life while you're also feeling so much fear about so many things?
Well, it's hard. I wish I could say that, I have found the magic bullet, get my book and these 7 tools will just, keep you out of fear and you'll always find the abundant life. It's not like that. I think it's a constant journey and a constant practice of stepping into it. One of the things I talk about is the first tool or practice. So the book is centered around these 7 practices, tools, things that you can do. And the first one is choose brave. And the reason I have that as my first one is because I think when the fear hits, we have a choice. We have a choice what we do. And we can choose to either step into it and do the hard right thing that leads to life and joy, or we can do the easier thing that keeps us in fear. And so I talk a little bit about that and what that looks like and how stepping into that, it's an act of trust, it's an act of bravery, but not in the kind of big heroic sort of way. For many of us, getting up in the morning when depression strikes is brave, or saying yes, I'll build a fort with you to the kids when a baby's kept us up all night. That's a brave choice. And I think for many of us, fear is a trust issue. I know when I was at my most fearful about whether I'd leave my kids as motherless or about the treatment that was coming down the line, it was saying, I'm not sure I can trust that they're going to be okay without me. I'm not sure I can trust that I'll be okay during treatment. And so I found it really helpful to combat that fear with scripture, with breathing Him in. He is the very breath of life. And sometimes just lying there and breathing in Jesus and breathing out the fear was all I could manage.
Yes. And I love that you talk about, it's not that you ever get over the fear, but that you choose the next thing with a fear.
Exactly.
And so it's okay. I guess I just want to say it's okay if you're still feeling the fear, but you can make the brave choice with the fear. So being brave isn't necessarily, oh, your fear is gone. Oh, I'm not worried at all.
No, exactly.
But it is making the brave choice.
Exactly.
So one of the other things that I was just fascinated with is how, you talk about all these tools. And one of the things you talk about that's important to like grab hold of this abundant life, even amongst all of this, is reaching out, and how reaching out can actually help you live an abundant life in all of this. And I think it's fascinating to me because when we're going through life and we're trying to live an abundant life, I think so often we turn inward, right? We're like, oh, it's all about taking care of myself. And yet you say one of the tools is you actually need to reach out. How does that work?
Well, one of the main reasons it's in there is because I just didn't do it to start with, Amy. Like you say, I turned inwards. I was, and my neighbor said to me, your job is to get well. And I really took that on, and she was right. My job was to get well. But in that, I thought, look, my life has fallen apart. I can't be the glue in somebody else's life, because I felt like reaching out, being kind had to be this all big singing, dancing thing that was going to absolutely drain me. And it wasn't until I met a woman called Vicky in my radiation department, and I tell the story in the book, but for your listeners, Vicky was a woman that I met in my radiation changing area, locker room, if you like. And this radiation department ran like clockwork. We were never sitting around waiting for our appointments. We'd go in, we'd change, we'd put on those beautiful hospital gowns and be whisked off to get zapped. And then we'd go and change and go home. So very rarely did I ever get a chance to say more than a cursory hello to anyone. But one day, this military operation must have ground to a halt for some reason, because Vicky and I were left sitting in this very small locker room changing area in our matching green hospital gowns together. And Vicky was obviously having a really tough time. Her hair was super thin and wispy from chemo. You could tell that her scalp was red and raw. She was sucking so earnestly on like a throat lozenge or something, because her mouth just looked so parched and dry and her lips were cracked. And we sat there in kind of polite silence for a while. But I'm an extrovert and I don't do well with silences. So I kind of broke protocol and said hello to her. And we just chatted for a bit and agreed that, yes, life sucks sometimes. And she had mouth and esophageal cancer. And so her radiation had basically zapped her salivary glands. So I managed to dig in the bottom of my handbag for a dusty throat lozenge from a while ago and give that to her. And then all I did was pray for her. I said, can I pray for you? And I prayed for her. And then I got asked to go to my appointment. The military operation was working again, and I never saw her again. But that one small act of kindness completely blew away the myth that I had, the myth of costly kindness, that kindness was going to drain me. And so, yes, I really think when we reach out, it can be at very little cost to ourselves, but is such a blessing to others and to us. I left my little conversation with Vicky so filled up and so energized and so just more in touch with people and with God and what he was doing and how he was leading me and all those kind of things. So yes, reaching out doesn't have to be big at all.
And I just, even in the small things, it can make such a big difference for both parties. And that's so hard to remember when it feels like we're in pain. And I think it's important to really be intentional about that.
Yes, and
I feel like I need a poster board,
yes.
Reach out.
Yeah. So in the book, I actually give a whole ton of ways to reach out without it completely draining and exhausting us. And they're good advice for, when a friend is going through a rough time as well. And I even have some scripture cards people can download and just a text that says, I'm thinking of you and praying for you. No need to reply. That is just transformational for somebody who's going through something and can take 2 minutes.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, Niki, I wish we had time to go through all 7 of these. This book is just packed full of so much wisdom and so much practical help for people. And like you said, it's not just when it's a huge storm, but every day we face something. That's just life on this earth and life as a human. And I just feel like this is just a guidebook for life, honestly. Thank you so much for writing this and sharing your story. If people want to get connected with you, how can they do that?
I have a website, nikihardy.com, and I spell my name Nikihardy. So nikihardy.com, and you'll find me and all sorts of other resources and somewhere where you can download a couple of free chapters on there. I'm often on Instagram at Niki.Hardy and on Facebook as well. So yes, I'd love people to come and say hi and connect with me.
All right. Well, we'll link all of that up in the show notes. And Niki, I've just enjoyed our time so much. Again, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Amy. So good to chat.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Niki. One thing that I do regret is that I didn't really get to capture Niki's humor. Oh my goodness, she has so much humor through her book, and then when you just meet her, she is just full of joy. So today you got to hear a big dose of her wisdom, but I hope you do connect with her. She is just a delight. So I am so challenged by Niki's words. I return to it over and over. I think about her words about how that we can have joy and abundance right in the middle of our pain. We don't have to wait for life to be pain-free to be full. Right in the midst of it, God has joy for us. And one of the things that I continue to go back to is her 5-step plan, and really how it is remembering God's credentials. And I just want to say that is one thing that was so big for me at the beginning of this year when life was really hard, is that I really had to remember who God was and who God had been for other people. And yes, we have the stories of the Bible, and absolutely go back to those and remember those. But also, guys, these stories that have been in this podcast. I don't know if you've been listening for a while, but there have been story after story after story, 150 of them now, where God has been so faithful. And I personally return to these podcast episodes in my mind to remember God's credentials. God has been so faithful. I literally would go in my journal and just begin to recall the stories where women had shared that God had been faithful. So even if you don't have personal stories that you can go through where God has been faithful, return to the ones in the Bible and return to the ones here on this podcast where God has been faithful, and rely on those. And then, just like she said, ask God to help you to trust, and then let go of everything else you're trusting and return to Him. And once you do that and you get through the season where it's really hard, begin to write these things down. I actually also started a faith notebook this year, is where I would actually just start printing out stories of where I just knew that God was real and God was true and God was faithful, and return to those. I actually connected with an author who printed some kind of journal like this, and he returns to it every single morning so he can remember who God is. And I was just so inspired by that, and I think that we all could benefit from something like that. It's exactly what Niki was talking about, is remembering who He is and just leaning on that all the time. So I hope this episode was helpful for you if you were going through a difficult time. Sometimes God helps us, or not helps us, but asks us to take a leap of faith. But sometimes God sort of pushes us off the cliff, right? And we go through these seasons where we really have to rely on our faith, build our faith as we go through it. So just praying for you as you go through a season like this. I would love to hear from you. You can always reach out through our social media channels, Facebook and Instagram. We are Abiding Ministries on both of those. So guys, thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next time on Feathers.